Now that you've used the stamper and the raise or lower terrain tools to create your terrain and gone ahead and set the height and then lowered parts of it to create gullies and valleys, we're now ready to add texture to our terrain to make it look more realistic. And for that, we'll use the Paint Terrain tool and the drop down the Paint Texture. Now the way this will work is we're going to create layers for each type of texture we want to add. So go down to the Edit Terrain Layers, click on Add Layer, and you'll get a list of terrains that come with the standard assets and the standard terrain tool. And we'll go ahead and click on Dirt to add that one. And notice that that will then cover everything with dirt. We can also add more layers, and inside those layers put other textures, including moss. Notice that they'll go side by side, and we'll keep adding layers here for all the different textures. You should have these same textures that came with your standard assets. And I now have the 6 layers that come with the standard assets. And so now we can start painting in our textures. So the first thing we'll do is we'll choose a brush. Now what you want to do is mix these textures. What you don't want is what I have here, which is just a repeating pattern of the texture that doesn't look realistic and you can see the repetition. So to achieve this, we'll go in and choose a texture, and then here in the stamp, brush size and opacity, I think we want to set this to a fairly low value and then go ahead and add one at a time. Let's start with the bottom and we'll add sand texture, and you can see that I want to very lightly tap so that it mixes in with the dirt texture. I don't want to click and hold the mouse like I did there, because then that will basically just cover everything with sand. But again, very carefully choosing a brush size and choosing a low opacity so we can kind of mix these textures together as a real terrain would be, a mixture here of gravel and sand. Making sure that I'm very careful. And let's go back and add some dirt back here, kind of mix it in. I'm just tapping my mouse to kind of get a mix of textures. Now this sheer rock face here, I'm going to do rock. And I'm probably going to go with a pretty large brush and a pretty high opacity, because this really won't have anything else other than rock. It's just a little bit too steep to really hold any gravel or sand, or going to add a little bit of moss to it. And I'm just kind of tapping. Let's turn down the opacity a little bit. I want to get a little bit of mixture here. But notice that this will be a sheer rock face, maybe at the top of that one there. And you can zoom in and zoom out to kind of get a terrain that looks a little bit mixed. Now, the scree is usually the rock face, the debris that occurs at the bottom of a rock face. So we'll turn down our brush size and turn down our opacity and add some scree, or on the very steep hillsides, maybe above the sand here, there'll be some loose rock, a mixture of loose rock and gravel and sand. So I'll mix all three together and so on. So I'm just mixing them. Let's go back and add a little bit of sand. And again, I think I'm going to turn down the opacity, and where I maybe go a little bit too heavy, like in these areas here, I'll add some more scree here. And in this way, kind of paint yourself a landscape, and you'll notice that I can zoom in to kind of get a better idea of the way that it will look. Let's add a little bit of rock over here, and let's go and add some moss very lightly to go on the rock. I think I probably did that a little bit too heavy, but you get the idea. And in this way, you can kind of just cover all the different terrain. Probably the one that you'll probably use the most is dirt. There'll be a little bit of dirt everywhere, especially on the bottom here. It'll be a mixture of dirt and sand. And I'll just kind of take my brush size here. You can see that it takes a little bit of patience. I'm not holding down my mouse really heavy like right there. Let's undo that. I'm just kind of tapping to kind of get a mixture of dirt and sand here. And let's get a little bit of sand up there. And you can zoom in to kind of get a patchwork of textures. Will probably do you a little bit better. That steep face right there, I'll do some more rock. And you can get other textures as well to maybe mix the rock. And of course, at the very, very top of the mountain, you might want to put a little bit of snow. Go with a very small brush size and maybe put a dusting of snow up there. And you can also get water to maybe add a bit of water around our island, and we'll get to that later. But in this way, you can kind of get a more interesting texture going. And again, you can zoom in to see maybe I've got a little bit too much sand there. So I'll get a little bit more dirt, and notice that I'm kind of tapping to get a mixture of sand. Now we'll add grass and trees to this later, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but you just kind of want to get a mixture of textures and just be patient. And I'm just tapping. Let's add a little bit of sand here, and you can get the idea that you're just going to go through and add your textures. Looks like I've got a terrain here that's overlapping. So I'm going to take this terrain and I'm going to just delete it. And notice that now I can get over here and paint the rest of my terrain with the textures that I'm interested in.